Hi everyone, my name's Helen O'Malley. I'm the curator of the community programme here at Tate Modern, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to the Turbine Hall today for the second day of Richard Bell's Embassy. Embassy is a space for discussion and activism in relation to Aboriginal rights, but it's also a space of solidarity, and all communities who have been affected by colonialism are welcomed into the space. Our speakers today, we're thrilled to be joined by Leila Hassan Howe and Farrukh Dhondy, both of whom have played a pivotal part in the British Black Arts movement, or excuse me, British Black Power movement of the 60s and 70s, but also remain active today. And we're also happy to be joined by Hannah Ishmael from the Black Cultural Archives. I am going to hand over to Richard Bell now to say a few words about how Embassy came into existence. Richard, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Helen. Welcome, everybody, to this version of Embassy, which is a tribute to the original tent embassy that was established in 1972 on the lawns across from Parliament House in the national capital, Canberra. And also, it's a tribute to the young people who established tent embassies to bring their complaints, to the public via these embassies that they set up all around Australia, not just in the cities, but in the small country towns as well. And I thought that was phenomenal, and decided to do. I thought I was going to just do it once, but I got invited to all these places around the world, like New York and Moscow, Jakarta, Amsterdam, and last year at Kessel in Germany for Documenta 15. Today we've got some locals. I always like to get local people involved in the embassies, not just because I'm saving on airfares and hotel rooms, but hopefully they bring an audience with them. So it's I'm really pleased to just be starting this second day of Embassy Talks. And I believe, Farrukh, you're first? Yeah. Okay.
If you like.
Over to you, mate.
I decided yesterday that this shouldn't be academic or sociological. It should be personal. And the best way that I can trace the movement of people, of black people, Asian people in this country, is to tell you the story as I went through it. I came to Britain as a student in Cambridge University. And of course, the university was a very protected environment. So within the university, I didn't experience any sort of racial conflict. But if one went to a pub with, say, a white girlfriend, they wouldn't serve you. They'd look through you and wait. You'd wait for 20 minutes saying, "Can I have some beer, please? Can I have 2 pints of beer?" And they pretend you weren't there. And they'd serve everybody else. And then you'd walk out disappointed. That was small irritations. I didn't realize that there was a much bigger dimension to the racial question in Britain. While I was at Cambridge, 3 years there, I came to London, and I began to see that there was a population in London of black and Asian workers. I didn't still quite understand what the problem was, or what the dimension of this interaction with these new communities of Britain was with the country. It was only when I, by chance, was offered a scholarship to do a thesis on Rudyard Kipling in Leicester that I began to realize what was what. I was, until then, as my grandmother would say about virgin girls, I was innocent and ignorant. And I went to Leicester to do my thesis and couldn't find a place to live in the heart of the town until an estate agent's secretary said to me, after 10 disappointments, being turned away from housing, listen, go to the Asian ghetto. I said, where is the Asian ghetto? She said, go there and look at the boards, the notice boards, and there'll be addresses saying room to let, flat to let, whatever. So I did. I said, where is it? And she said, Narborough Road. And I went there and found housing. Immediately I looked up 3-4 addresses, went to a phone booth, called the guys. They said, yes, these rooms under the stairs are there to let. And I went there, and it was the Asian community's stronghold, because on Fridays, when my then partner and I could afford half a pint of beer, we'd go to a pub called the Pack Horse. And of course, the natives called it the Packy Horse, because the Asian workers, Indian workers, would gather there on Friday, on payday, and stay there till 2 o'clock in the morning, because they would buy pints of beer for each other, get quite drunk, and then go to one of their places for dinner, where the poor women would be woken up to serve us chapatis and whatever. And when we turned up there with our half pints, they would say, a fellow approached us and said, are you Indians? And we said, well, look at the way she's dressed, right? She was wearing a shalwar kameez. Of course we're Indians. And we went, they said, come here and join us. 35 workers, Asian workers. And it was then that, of course, they've spread 6-8 pints in front of us, and we couldn't drink them. But we used to meet them regularly on Friday evenings. And one Friday evening, 4 or 5 of them were very depressed, and everybody was silent, said, what's going on? And they said, these fellows have been dismissed from the factory. So what for? Said, well, a lady worker was refused to go to the loo, and the supervisor fought with her, white supervisor, and we fought with the supervisor, and we punched somebody, and we were thrown out, and blah, blah. And so we've lost a job. And I said, why don't you go to the union? They said, what's a union? And we said, you've got an Indian Workers Association, don't you? Said, yeah, the Indian Workers Association only deals with Bhangra festival costumes and stuff. We don't do anything like that. So we said, okay, let's go to the student union. How many Asian workers are there? They said 95%. So, well, let's appeal to them. We went to the students union and cyclo-styled at the time. That was the way you reproduced pamphlets. We'd got the pamphlets and in Punjabi and in English. And we went at 5:30 in the morning for the 6 o'clock shift. None of the workers went in to the factory. They all listened to us. We stood outside. And it was the transformation of the Indian Workers Association of Leicester into an active organization. And of course, they were reinstated. All the supervisor was reprimanded, and they were all given a 2% pay rise in 5 hours' time. The management came out and settled all this because they couldn't lose a day's production. This Indian Workers Association then went on to, in Leicester, to go into pubs where the National Front would meet, and there was a lot of activity of that sort. They de-racialized, de-apartheided a couple of pubs in that way. It became their mission. And one day they said that there's a conference of Black and Asian people in Alexandra Palace in London. And so we're all going. And so we got together, and 2-3 coaches of Leicester Asian workers, and turned up in Alexandra Palace. Thousands of people, different associations on the platform. Some people stood up and gave Maoist speeches about coming down from the prairies and prairie fires and bullshit, you know. And the only person who impressed me was a young black lady called Althea Jones. And she stood up there and said, I'm from the Black Panther movement, and this is what the new communities of Britain are are suffering, and this is what we're going to do about it, blah, blah, blah. And I thought extremely impressive. When she came down from the platform, I went to her group of people, and I said, you're from the Black Panther movement, do you take Asians? And she said, who do you think these guys are? And there were 2, 3 Asian guys there. And I said hi to them. And they said, well, you have to serve an apprenticeship. And the apprenticeship I served was reporting on the mangrove dine trial, which was going on at the time. And 2 of the members were the mangrove of the Black Panther movement, Althea included, were defendants at the trial. So I would go to the trial in the evenings, gather in the afternoon to the Old Bailey, gather the information of what had happened that day, and then turn up at the headquarters of the Black Panther movement and write it all up, and they'd write it as pamphlets and send it out to people. So that was the mangrove trial. I joined then, of course. I was accepted as a member of the Black Panther movement, and we used to run a newspaper there called Freedom News. And what we decided was that Freedom News would not just be a newspaper, we'd start a bookshop in Brixton and propagate things that way. And so we squatted a place called 74 Railton Road. The Railton Road was known as the front line because all manner of activity took place there, and it was usually the battleground between the police and youths and dope sellers and whoever else. And so we got there, we called it Freedom News Bookshop, and we renovated the squat, and I lived on the 2nd floor of the squat. And a friend of mine, Keith Cowling, who'd architectured the place and done it up, he lived on the 1st floor, and an African gentleman lived in the basement. We never found his name out because he would drum all night and shout, Africa, Africa, and so we used to call him Africa. And one day, to be exact, on the 15th of March, 1973, the Ides of March, because I like to identify myself with Julius Caesar, somebody threw a petrol bomb into the bookshop. And I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning, choking with smoke. And I thought somebody was smoldering me, but, smothering me. But I crawled to the gas, I couldn't breathe. And then I realized that it was a fire. When I opened the door to the staircase, the flames were bursting up. And not being able to breathe, I got to the window after 2 minutes, opened it, stuck my head out and took one deep breath and then thought, I'm going to die here unless I jump. And the glass of the bookshop was bursting outwards. And I decided that whatever it is, I only had underwear on. I jumped through the window, twisted my ankles, got burnt, blah, blah. And the neighbors by the time, right, were quite alert. There was a lady on the opposite house shouting, oh God, I said, forget God, call the fire engine. And, other neighbors gave me a coat to shelter me from the cold, I suppose, took me in, gave me a thing. And of course, the members of the Black Panther movement came around, rallied around. I went to my work and went to the hospital, got repaired. It was okay. And then, of course, that became, we heard the next morning that 5 houses, Asian and Black, businesses and houses had been firebombed that night. The police didn't catch anybody. The fire engine told us clearly that it was a Molotov cocktail that was thrown through the window and burst things. And in the Freedom News newspaper, we ran an article about these racist bombings, And that, please don't laugh, is a picture of myself standing outside 74 Railton Road with the headlines of the bomb attacks on black people that night. And it was a little before the Black Panther movement, under all manner of pressure, broke up. And after it broke up, the people who were members of the Black Panther movement and didn't want particular parts of the ideological makeup or were dissenters, including myself in some way, wanted to carry on the activities that the Black Panther movement had initiated, like combating the police and doing things about education, doing things about housing, doing things about employment. And so we formed, we tried to form organizations this way and that. It was quite difficult until one day, Leila, Howe, and other people, workers, who worked in the Institute of Race Relations, which was a kind of a theoretical academic organization. I hope Leila won't disagree. They said that we want to turn this organization and its publication called Race Today from reportage and news into an active organization. And so the activity, the reason they chose, the path they chose towards this activity was to appoint a non-white editor. And the collective and she'll tell you more about it perhaps, they chose one of the Black Panther movement dissenters who was charismatic, who spoke, who was one of the big activists of the time. He was called Darkus Howe, and that is his picture. And they appointed Darkus as the editor of Race Today. Darkus immediately called upon his political associates, Selma James, the wife of C.L.R. James, to write an article about sexism, feminism, and the struggle. And then the second edition, he asked me, because I was a school teacher at the time, to write about the experience of black children in schools. And I wrote an article called Black Explosion in British Schools, because what I was experiencing as a school teacher was downright absolute racism, institutional racism of the educational comprehensive system in London. I can't say what happened outside, but I described that in a long article, was invited on television, all the newspapers picked it up to speak about it. It was called Black Explosion in British Schools. And Race Today went on to become an active organization, because we went one night and removed all the equipment, typewriters, this, that, and the other, cyclostyling machines, put them in a van at 12. I used to drive an old post office van. I bought it for £20. And we lodged all the equipment in 2-3 cars, and we went down to Brixton and squatted another place and put all the machinery in there. So we left the Institute of Race Relations to do its academic thing. We thought we'd become an active organization around the magazine Race Today, and formed a collective, some of whose members are here today, formed a collective which then would go on to, for 15, 20 years, to become the center of activity. Now, let me tell you that Race Today was not simply reportage. It was an active collective which interfered in the movement, as we call it, of the new communities. And my personal experience with it was, and Leila will tell you other of the rest of it, we were colleagues, comrades together, was in the East End of London with the Bangladeshi community. And the Bangladeshi community at the time, in the late 70s, was quite in quite a state. They were mostly sweatshop workers without their families, sleeping 4 or 5 to a room in places. And we began there not reporting academically or sociologically, or going on television to complain about bad housing. We thought we ought to do something about it. And there were 2 campaigns that Race Today initiated with other people in the East End of London. Yes, one of the phenomena in the East End of London was known as packy bashing. And what it meant was, even on the estates where there were isolated Bangladeshi families, they were being assaulted by the neighbors, by other people who smash their doors down, throw things through their letterboxes, beat up the women and children as they walked through the estate to get home or away from it. And it was intolerable. And then Bangladeshi workers, isolated at night, leaving their sweatshops and walking down the pavement, would be stopped by skinheads and other kind of racists and beaten up for no reason whatsoever. Just packy bashing, it was called. And we thought this has to stop. And so there were no organized Bangladeshi associations at the time. So we went in there, and with the help of the Bangladeshi Community Center, where a lot of young Bangladeshis gathered, we said, let's call a rally called the Anti-Racist Committee of Asians in East London. And we called a rally in which we expected a few hundred people. Thousands of people came to the cinema where we were holding the rally, and we spoke. And from that rally, they overflowed into Brick Lane and all the way to Bethnal Green Road, if you know the area at all. It meant thousands of people had gathered to listen with loudspeakers outside. And we said, let's, from this rally, let's ask for young people to volunteer to be vigilante groups to stop packy bashing. And so groups of 8, 10 would gather, several groups, every day, every evening, on the pavements, in the restaurants, in the housing associations, to stop packy bashing. And it stopped. And the police came and said to us, you can't run vigilante groups, it's illegal. Said, well, you do your job, and then we'll give up the vigilante groups. It's because you're not doing your job that we are here. That was one activity. And the second activity was squatting Bangladeshi families. There were streets and streets left by the GLC, the Greater London Council, and Tower Hamlets to redevelop them, and they were empty, boarded up streets of houses. And we used to go there, take the boards down, smash the locks, put our own locks in, move in there, substitute the smashed up lavatories and basins and whatnot, install second-hand ones there, and get the Bangladeshi families in. The Bengali Housing Action Group, BHAG, which means tiger in Bengali, was instrumental in getting about 10 streets and a huge estate called the Pelham Buildings into housing. Of course, Tower Hamlets and GLC realized that this was a movement that's going to defeat them, and they offered all the tenants, all the squatters that we had moved in, about 600 houses of them, they offered them tenancies in housing associations, which we saw as a triumph at the end. So I'll end there because I've told you about the activities. There's lots more to say. Sorry, I forgot that. That is the protest against our housing association, and that is the anti-racist committee that I was talking about, flooding the streets.
Thank you. My name is Hannah Ishmael, and I am from the Black Cultural Archives. I would like to firstly say thank you to Richard Bell, thank you to the Tate, and thank you to my panellists, Leila and Farrukh, partly for having me. So I just wanted to pick up on some of the threads that Farrukh has started us off with and talk a little bit about the history of Black Cultural Archives. We are based in Brixton, South London, so just around the corner from Railton Road that Farrukh was speaking about earlier. And we began in 1981 as a movement, a political movement in itself, to create a Black archive, one of the first, not the only, but one of the first Black archives in London. So this is a picture of one of our founders, Len Garrison, petitioning the local council, Lambeth Council, to create a building for our archives. It's quite an interesting quote. I won't really go into it now, but fundamentally, one of the rationales were around bringing together Black history, making a space for Black history, and using it as in particularly anti-racist way to further the cause of Black communities in Britain. Our history is kind of complicated, so I don't really have time to go into the ins and outs of it, but fundamentally it is the meeting of Len Garrison, one of our founders, who's pictured on the right. He was born in Jamaica in the 1940s. He was an educationalist. He came over to Britain in the 1950s, really interested in education. In the 1980s, he met Queen Mother More, who was an African-American activist. I don't know, hopefully you can see her dates. She was born in 1898 in Louisiana, of the southern states of America, lived till she was nearly 100, so she died in 1997. And so she basically lived for the entirety of the 20th century, and she was involved in many of the political activities of the 20th century. So she was friends with Marcus Garvey. I believe that you are very interested in owe a lot of your work to Marcus Garvey. Very interested, was friends with Marcus Garvey, never formally joined his UNIA, but was very, I'd say, friendly with him. She became a communist. She fell out with the communists. Then she joined the Black Power movement in the States in America. And then she's one of the 4 founders of the modern reparations movement. So she was one of the first people to petition the American government for reparations. She was born Audley Moore and got the honorific title Queen Mother because of her work with women's groups in West Africa during the 1970s and 1980s. But she came to Britain in 1981 to talk of her idea to form an international series of monuments to African history and heritage, where she met Len Garrison, and we formed our organisation, which, if you are interested and like doing searches on the Charity Commission website, our official charity title is the African People's Historical Monument Foundation UK, in honour of Queen Mother More. Black Cultural Archives is a little bit friendlier on the tongue, so we are known as the Black Cultural Archives. So as I said, quite a lot of our history, we capture the history of the movements that we were talking about today, but also are informed by the movements. So the first movement, as Farrukh was discussing, is the Black education movement. So quite a lot of our foundation is due to the publication of this book in the middle, called How the West Indian Child is Made Educationally Subnormal in the British School System by Bernard Cord. Very similar to what Farrukh was talking about in his book. It charted the very racist practices of the removal of Black children from mainstream education into what was known as these ESN schools, or these educationally subnormal schools. And this was one of the triggering events for the Black education movement, which you can see some examples of on the screen. I don't know if you're going to talk a little bit more about that as well, but this is a copy of Race Today, talking about the Black education movement. A lot of our collections also speak to the issues of policing, as Farrukh was discussing, particularly the SUS, and which is essentially what's now known as stop and search, but the arbitrary arrest of mainly black men, but not entirely black men, by the police under a vagrancy law. So we also have the images from the Black People's Day of Action in March 1981. The uprisings, which also followed in 1981 as a direct response to over-policing and police misconduct, that straight through to Brixton 1985 and Tottenham uprisings of 1985 through to more present day. We also have a lot of material relating to the Black women's movement. So the Black women's movement was founded in the late 1970s, went through to the early 1980s, as a space for women who were previously involved in the Black Power movement, but came together as women to discuss issues, particularly around the misogyny, some of the misogyny in the Black Power movement. And so the image on the top right is of a conference that was held in Brixton of the Black women's movement, some of their publications, and publication of OWAD, which was the umbrella group. And finally, we have a lot of material on the Black Power movement. And we have material on the Black Power movement broadly, specifically the Black Panthers, as we can see here, but also other groups such as the Black Liberation Front and the Universal Coloured People's Associations. So when we talk about Black Power, we talk about it in a very broad way, picking up Black Panthers and other groups. And finally, we also do a lot of contemporary collecting. So these are material that we collected in 2020 after the murder of George Floyd and the subsequent Black Lives Matter protests that took place across the world. These are the kind of questions that we were asking. It was during lockdown, it was during COVID. So we wanted to ensure that as an archive, we're also collecting the present day so we can tell the histories of Black Lives Matter protests and contextualize them within our archive. One of the things that we had to ensure that we did was that none of the material had any personal information in it. As I say, because it was lockdown, because it was COVID, these protests were essentially illegal. So all of the images that we have are pictures of protests or backs of people's heads. So we try to ensure that for ethically and just for the safety of the people who are donating to us, that we just don't have any personal information. And that is us and Black Cultural Archives. I want to kind of leave more space to hear from our other guests, but if you have any questions, please do ask. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. My name is... oh, God, sorry. First thing, have the mic. Okay. So I'm really going to talk about my memories of the Black Power movement, and it's going to be a continuous slide because, like, if I try to do what Farrukh and Hannah have done, I will forget to press the clicker. So there I am in 1971 at the March for George Jackson, one of the Soledad brothers who was murdered by the police in America. And the images you're going to see span a 10-year period. They go from 71 to 81, and I'm not going to speak specifically to any of them. I'm going to tell my story, but hopefully you'll see some of the activity we did as the slides move along. So I, like Farrukh, joined the Black Power movement in the 70s. I joined the Black Unity and Freedom Party. A young woman, many of us, young men and women at that time, really wanted to make a change in the way we were treated in Britain. And so we joined a whole load of Black Power organisations, which Hannah has talked about. And these Black Power organisations weren't only based in London, they were based in Leicester, in Nottingham, in Birmingham, in Manchester, in Leeds, everywhere. You would find Black Power groups who had their own newspapers, like Farrukh's newspaper, Freedom News. Our newspaper was called Black Voice. And basically, we ran activities very much modelled on the Black Panther movement in the United States. And yesterday, I had the pleasure of listening to both to Gilla and to Richard about the Aboriginal movement and the impact that the Black Power movement in America had on their Aboriginal rights movement. And without a doubt, for us, the Black Power movement of the late 60s and early 70s were heavily, heavily influenced by the Panthers in the United States. The papers we had, the demands we had, were all modelled on the demands of the Panthers. As I said, we were young men and women. I was sort of in my 20s, very early 20s, 21, but I was kind of middle range. Many of the people in the Black Power movement that I joined were 16, 17, and 18, young boys and girls who had seen what had happened to their parents who'd been brought over as immigrants to do immigrant labour in Britain and were experiencing extreme racism in schooling, in housing, on the factory floor. They could see what was happening to their parents, and we were just determined that it wasn't going to happen to us. And so the Black Power movement was very much a protest movement, but we also did something else. Based on the Panthers, we also built our own institutions. So I taught in what we called a supplementary school in somebody's house where, you know, and I didn't have any formal education other than being educated till I was 16. But I was in the position of teaching young people maths and English, because at that time we felt we had to do something about the experience of black people black children in our education system. So we formed our own schools. We had our own newspapers, which we edited ourselves, did the content ourselves. We protested about what was happening to us on the shop floor, particularly against the police at that time. And we were very much conscious that we were part of an international movement. So for us, we knew Bobby Sykes in Australia. Bobby Sykes was a name that was familiar to us. We knew of different movements around the world because we felt that we were really part of, at that time, was really a revolutionary promise, because we really believed we could and we wanted to change the world. And so our ideas were, we have to do something, and we were very passionate. And when I listened to Gilla yesterday, and I know you got emotional, but it is emotional to think of how collectively we work together. We are so very conscious of individuals today. But for us, we wouldn't do anything unless our brothers and sisters were part of what we were doing. We shared our movement, we discussed, and we did everything in a collective sense. We wanted to change what we wanted to do collectively, and we believe we did. For various reasons, the Black Power movement went into decline, and there will be articles in the future written about why that is. Probably some academic somewhere will get some kind of thesis going and will tell the world what happened. But what happened to us and to myself and Farrukh is, even though the Black Power movement went into decline and many of the organizations changed, we decided we would keep on, and of course, we formed the Race Today Collective. Farrukh has sort of talked a bit about how we, in the still of night, stole equipment from the Institute of Race Relations and went to squat in Brixton. And at that time, again, it's difficult for people to imagine, but there was a very, very vibrant black squatting movement in Brixton. And when we moved to Brixton at that time, we literally chose the house in which we lived in. We would say, we'll have that one, kick down the door and change the lock. And for the offices of Race Today, we did the same thing. We kicked down the door, changed the lock, and we began to publish our journal, Race Today, from those offices. The important thing about Race Today, and some of the images are coming up now, is again, it was a collective that decided for itself what we would do about our situation. We decided we were not victims, and the first editorial we wrote was to say, we are not victims. We can shape our own destiny, and we can do something about it ourselves. And so in the collective, apart from publishing, which was really, really important to us, because it was really the only voice, the only radical voice that was talking about what was going on in the immigrant communities up and down the countries, in the Asian, African, and West Indian communities, of the oppression that was being faced by the police, of the discrimination in housing and in education and in our social lives. So publishing was really, really important. And Farrukh has had a lovely image of my husband, Darkus Howe, up there. But Darkus was really key to understanding, because he'd been a journalist in Trinidad, and there's a photograph of him there addressing a whole crowd in Trinidad. He'd been a member of the Black Power movement in Trinidad. He'd been an editor for the Oilfield Workers Trade Union newspaper in Trinidad. He understood, partly through the understanding of what his uncle had said, CLR James, that publishing and making sure that we analysed and discussed what we were doing for ourselves. We were always very clear that we couldn't always concentrate on what they were doing to us. We had to say what we were doing about it. And in that way, we were strengthening our communities. And so we did this for 14 years. And as I've said, the images I'm showing, that's of course, the Panther movement, of which Farrukh was a member. The movement that I've got up there spans 10 years. And really what we would say is the culmination of our movement was something called the Black People's Day of Action, when we mobilized 20,000 people on the streets of Britain. And that arose because of a fire that had taken place in Deptford, where 13 young people were burnt to death, some immediately and some afterwards, but 13 young people had died. And the British state, the British government, the authorities said absolutely nothing about this. There was very little news coverage except in the local press. And the feeling in the community really was, enough is enough, that we have to take a stand on this issue, and we have to show the authorities that we're really not putting up with this. And why the Black People's Day of Action is important is because it was a coalition of different black organizations and different groups that came together, and we would meet weekly and we would discuss on what action we had to take. What should we do? There was a lot of militancy. Some people thought it was time to meet violence with violence. There were people there who were saying we had to make sure the authorities knew how terrible it was. But for many of us, we had thought that knocking on the door of authority and pleading, please do something about our terrible condition, really wasn't going to cut it this time. And so we decided on a mass mobilization. In one of the meetings, a black worker stood up and said, what we really need in this country is a black strike. We are key to the health service, to the transport industry, to a lot of the factories around at the time, and we need to make our presence felt. There were huge numbers of workers in Fords and in many of the major car companies that existed at that time. And so we decided, instead of doing the traditional demonstration of going to Trafalgar Square, having a rally, having some speeches, and then all going home, that we would actually disrupt London. And so we chose Monday as the day that we would do our march, and we marched for 8 hours through London. We started in Deptford, and we marched to Hyde Park. So in order, you know, with any kind of demonstration in Britain, you have to have negotiations with the police. And we were having our negotiations with the police in Brixton Police Station. And every time we said we want to cross Blackfriars Bridge and march into London, the police were saying no. And I can see the meeting now. There was a Commander Polkinghorne there who was saying, we don't mind you protesting in Deptford and in Elephant and Castle, in the kind of areas where black people live, but you can't walk into the city of London on a working day. You just cannot do that. And we held fast. And we said, no, we are marching through London to Hyde Park, and you have to allow us. So, of course, in our meetings, as you know, if you've been involved in any radical movement, we knew there were members of the special branch there, and we knew that they were feeding back to the police and to the authorities that the temperature was so hot that if they didn't allow us to march through London, then there could be really big repercussions in terms of how the black community was really willing to fight back. So in the end, they agreed that we could march through London on a Monday. And for anybody who knows any radical history of Britain, this is the first time it's been done, I think, since the Chartist movement. So we knew, for some of us who'd studied a bit of history, that this really was quite a historic thing to do. So the agreement was made that we could march through London, and as the march left Deptford, and as one of the organisers of the march, I have to say, the fire was in January, and the Black People's Day of Action was for March. So we had kind of really 2.5 months to try and mobilise a national demonstration. But I think both Gilla and you will know, Richard, that when there's a movement, when there is a feeling within a community to do something, you're doing two things. You're mobilising, but you're talking to people who want to be mobilised. And so there was really no issue about us being able to mobilise. Darkus, who you see there, this is after his being convicted, but that's another story. That's just when he's been released from jail. Darkus went up and down the country and talked to different black communities in church halls, in community halls, and said, we want this to be a national demonstration. This isn't a London-based demonstration. This isn't a South demonstration. We want people to come from all over England to march. And so said, so done. On the morning, we gathered in Fordham Park. It was drizzling, and there was this tension and apprehension. Is this really going to happen? And then the coaches just started to come from Leeds, from Liverpool, from Huddersfield, from Manchester, from Birmingham, from Bristol. Coachloads of black people just pouring into Fordham Park to begin the demonstration. And as we began the demonstration, people would see us on buses, would look down and see us marching and just get off the bus. The film that Steve McQueen made called Uprising, which is still available on iPlayer, shows that as we marched past schools, school kids were climbing over the walls because the teachers locked the school gates to prevent the kids from joining us, and school children jumped over walls to join our demonstration. And so 20,000 of us finally marched through to Hyde Park. The parents who led the demonstration, the parents of the dead children, went and handed in their petition, and we marched to Hyde Park and had really, which is still the most significant black demonstration in Britain today, the Black People's Day of Action. So when I talk, many people say, do you think it was successful? Do you think it worked? And again, I was very conscious yesterday when people were talking, because after that demonstration, what you begin to see is society opening up and offering civic positions, local positions to black people, to black and Asian people, to get positions within local government, to get better jobs, because really after 81, the impact of that demonstration was felt, and it caused a shift in society. That's what I will say. There was a shift in terms of the recognition of us and what our demands were and what was required of us. So some of the graphics, I'll just quickly go through. That was the house. These are the photos of the children who were murdered. You can see the militancy, Bladagaran, if justice na come. This is Darkus at Carnival, a revolutionary film. Theme, we played Forces of Victory to commemorate the victory of Angola, Guinea-Bissau against Portuguese imperialism. Some covers of Race Today, which show you the range of what we published. And again, the scope of our coverage in terms of being Indian, raising the issues around immigration, very huge at that time. Darkus was sentenced to prison for 3 months. We were able, by a campaign, to get him released within a week. So that was the We Free Darkus. And then I'm going to come to our latest edition of Race Today, the special edition that we have, which is in my bag and forgot to bring here, but is available in the bookshop. Because what we've done to commemorate Darkus's 80th birthday, and with some of the people who are in the audience today, is produce another issue of Race Today in memory of Darkus, and in memory really of that tradition, that memory of what we did 40, 50 years ago, talking about the current issues that Black Lives Matter have raised around the whole issue of statues and the issue of what we need to do. This, of course, is the current protest of Iran, and again, the international scope. What you find now in a lot of discussions now, that international spread that we had in Black Power and in Race Today doesn't exist, and so in the issue that we've done now, we've done that. We've also done a lot on arts and culture. One of the things that Race Day was really known for was its discussion around the artistic and cultural movement, knowing that really, sometimes they're ahead of the political movement, and some of the issues and debates around arts and culture, which we had in Race Today, we've continued in the current issue. This is the Black People's Day of Action at Blackfriars, where the police tried to stop us crossing the bridge. This is a man who was framed by the police in Bradford. George Lindo, very famous campaign. This again is the Black People's Day of Action. You can see ain't no stopping us now, we're on the move. And you can see the faces and the age group of the people there. There's a lot of young people who came out. I should have said on the Black People's Day of Action, although the police agreed we could cross the bridge to go into the city, they did try to stop us. And it was the black youth at the front that you see there at the confrontation who fought the police, and the demonstration broke through in order to get through. This is Darkus in Trinidad, addressing a crowd. There was a very strong Black Power movement in Trinidad. Farrukh mentioned the Mangrove trial. This is Darkus, his partner at the time, Barbara Bees, outside the court. This is again the house that was burnt out by racists in New Cross, which led to the huge demonstration which I've spoken about. So I'm going to leave it there. I mean, I could talk for hours, as you can see. But I hope I've given you a picture of what it was really like to grow up in this period, in this era, and that we have tried to memorialize that in the latest issue of Race Today that we've produced, which is available in the bookshop, for you to get an understanding of what we did, why we did it. And thank you very much for listening.
Wow. Thanks for that. That was truly amazing and emotional. So, I'm trying to think about those good old days. There weren't that many of them. But one of the good things about the good old days was that if there was a place that would let us in at night, you know, like to go to have a drink or whatever, it was great because we'd look for the best seats in the house, and we'd wait for one of the white people to get up, and one of us would sit down, usually the blackest one among us. We'd go and sit down, and then one by one they'd all get up. So we'd end up with the best seats in the house. I see a lot of, gee, this is loud. Is this loud? Oh, okay. Oh. Gee, like there were so many parallels to what happened in our country. Where, of course, we heard some of these names and that as well in Australia. And we were, as you said, we were heavily influenced by both Marcus Garvey and the Black Power movement, the Black Panthers in particular, with their social programs. We found that they were what helped us reach into our communities, and start delivering the services that they needed, that we couldn't get from the white society. If we went to see a doctor, we'd have to go to the hospital, and then they'd see all the white people first, and then see us. We ended up setting up Aboriginal medical services so our people could get serviced properly, that sort of thing. And the demise of our movement, I thought, well, in Redfern, where I was living, but how they brought us down was, well, I've got to say, it was heroin. They just bombed our community with heroin, and it just eventually there was just a rump left, and that's all that's there now. It's all gentrified, inner city Redfern, one train stop away from Central Station. It was just, it was such a great place to live. There was the largest community of Aboriginal people anywhere in the country. And for me, coming down from Queensland, which was notoriously one of the worst of the Australian states for treatment of Aboriginal people, to go to Sydney, to be able to go to a hotel, and there was just 95, 99% Aboriginal people. I hadn't seen that before, and so that made me feel very much at home. Wherever I went, there was just all black people, and I just haven't black. It was just something that was so overpowering for me, because I came from reserve on in different communities, different towns, and they were all small, and we were always outnumbered. Probably at least five to one. So here I'm, in the heart of the beast. And this time I'm here, I'm seeing a lot more black and brown faces than what I did when I first came here in the 90s. So. Anybody got any questions?
Hello. First of all, thank you all so much. Thank you, Richard, for inviting everybody here, and thank you, everyone who spoke. It was incredible. I've got a question for Farrukh and Leila about what you were saying, Farrukh, about the group of Bangladeshi people, and anti-racist Asian group taking over all these houses that were then became homes for 600 homes. Like, that's so incredibly. Well, I wrote down the numbers. I might have it wrong, but it's incredibly powerful. Like, if I think about now, how much people are kind of struggling with housing and the cost of living, and everybody's rents going up and stuff. It feels like what you were doing, and with Race Today Collective, it feels like what you're doing was so concrete, and it wasn't asking for permission. It was just doing it, what needs to be done. And I guess this is the question that I feel like I always end up asking at things like this. And it's, I guess my question is around how do we get back to that? To like actually taking things back instead of, or what do you think is potentially lost in the process of formalization? Do you know what I mean? In terms of like institutions becoming, a lot of the people that are still alive from those movements, it feels like, have become part of, the councils and establishments and stuff like that. And I feel like to give context, I've been a squatter, I've been a squatting activist. was one of the founders of the London Queer Social Centre, which was a squatted social centre, which we used to put on anti-corporate pride events. And, you know, there's a real incredible long history of queer, LGBT, black and brown squatting, of taking over buildings. But in comparison to what you described, like having your own newspapers, like giving people homes when they need homes, it just feels so concrete, and it feels like we so badly need to kind of get back to that. And I wonder what the kind of, how you feel about, I guess, the institutionalization and the kind of formalization of anti-racist politics into kind of, you know, instead of being like, no, we don't want a seat at the table, actually, we're going to go and make our own table. We're going to kick the door open and we're going to just make something completely different. I'd really like to hear what your thoughts are on, yeah, that tension and yeah, because I feel like, not to romanticize the past, but I mean, that it's so concrete what you did, and it feels like everything now is so theoretical and abstract, if that makes sense.
Think about it, the examples that I gave you were two. One, lack of housing for the Bangladeshi community and assaults where they lived in isolated housing estates, right? So there was a huge will amongst a mass of people to find places where they could live and where they could live safely. So it was, we didn't invent that movement. That movement, the potential for such a movement existed. We organized it. The second thing was Paki bashing, right? Somebody had to stop it. Everybody who was bashed and everybody who knew that the other people were being bashed wanted to stop that. How to do it was the question. You know, I would say that the DNA of the race today, the essential of it, was inspired by a modern interpretation of Marxism by C.L.R. James. And what C.L.R. James said was that the old model of the Leninist party leading people and inspiring them to do something, and because the revolution is not going to work anymore in the modern civilization, in the modern democracies, what we need to see is the movements of people and assist those movements of people. Now, what has happened since those movements took place, the ones that you said you appreciate, is that the internet and the modern technological developments have made a mass of people feel that they are being active when they text something. So you have a linguistic revolution rather than a practical one. But I am absolutely sure that there are hundreds, if not more, causes in which people are ripe to take action. And somehow those need to be organized, and that will be the way forward. And that's what I would say to this generation of activists, if there are such, and there are such, that what you have to look for is the potential of a mass movement where a need is absolutely evident to a mass of people, and then you organize that need into political activity.
Sorry, may I just jump in very quickly as a slight plug for Black Cultural Archives, is that this sense of isolation is part of the process. It's how the state tries to keep everyone apart. And I think Black Cultural Archives, one of the reasons why we were founded is to preempt that, to get in the way of that, to disrupt histories so that people have a sense of community, but a historical sense of community. So whilst we were founded in the 1980s, one of the kind of movements of our founders was to highlight the Black presence as far back as we can go. So we have material from the Roman periods, just to kind of speak to that long presence of Black history. And so I think coming not necessarily to Black Cultural Archives, but to know Black history is a way of physically and practically learning from the past, you know, why things didn't work. You know, you can kind of reinterpret them for the modern age. But I think to know that these kind of activities existed and were So successful is a way of kind of thinking through that you don't have to start from scratch all the time, and that's kind of very much around kind of why why organisations like Black Culture, like Archives exist, and why we collect this material so that people don't feel historically isolated or physically isolated in kind of moving these anti-racist projects forward and kind of moving towards a better life, I guess.
Sorry. I wouldn't add more than to say that given where we are right now in society and given what's going on is so dire, there are people who want change and want to change their reality. We didn't go out and preach to people and say, you must do this and you must do that. We knew what was going on the ground because we were activists within our various communities. And we gave voice to that movement that existed and helped develop it rather than go in and try and lead it to make change. And I think that might be something also that people could learn from.
Well, there's also the fact that most poor people are struggling just to survive. And so they don't have the time. You have to think about the really important things in their life, simply because they're constantly struggling to survive. And I'm very lucky. Like, as an artist, I get time to think about what's really important in my life. But my relatives, my friends, they don't. They're busy looking for how they're going to get their next meal sometime. So there's that, and there's the way that I think we need to make them aware of how important it is that, that their issues, at the bottom, whereas we have a media that sort of dismisses, is very good at sort of killing the stories that comes up. Probably we need to get, as artists, we need to get better at articulating what is happening. And if our people can see that in the public area, well, then they know that it's important, so they will start thinking about these things. So maybe that's what I think can be done. Gilla.
I just have one question about the flag with the lady that was holding it, the red, black, and green flag. You said she was from Iran or Iraq? Iran. And because that's the flag, the color that Marcus Garvey put together. And I actually sewed one for the Aboriginal Embassy and flew it over top of the Aboriginal Embassy, the original one in Canberra, because that was a connection that was connecting us to the rest of the world and that movement that was happening at that time for black people who were fighting against colonialism and looking at reparations for the slave trade, which was all started here in England, came out of England. And on the other point, you talked about someone doing a study for the demise of the Black Power movements and those characteristics that were there that drove people forward. I can say I've investigated this back home, and they were clever at domesticating resistance in Australia. They mastered a program of domesticating the resistance, and what they did was that they played on our demands for better homes and legal services, medical services, etc. And so the government then were very clever in that they started funding programs to develop these things, believing, or having the people believe that they were going to head towards self-determination and achieving those things within their own community and their own rights. But they allowed that to go on for 30 years. And so they calmed the resistance, they calmed the people by funding these organizations with a lot of money, putting it in, getting people to falsely believe that they were in a process of being self-determining, but then the government changed after 30 years and began to tear these organizations down. And you can trace it right through in Australia how they did that. and they quietened down the Aboriginal leadership. Now, we unfortunately made some horrible mistakes by, getting control of some of these organisations, and by getting control of those organisations, people started to develop little empires, and that's how the government was starting to portray that these leaders were developing these empires and capitalising on this money that was from the public sector. And then the government began to undermine everything because they played that game of divide and rule again, and then they started bringing it all down. And right now in Australia, we're worse off than we were in the 50s and 60s.
Yes.
I got to agree with that. There's like the empires that are still there. Some of them are pushing for the voice, so to make sure that they keep the flow of, yes, in power, the flow of money. So,
should I? Yeah. Let's say that, yes, governments do react to mass movements and so on, but it's not only governments that make history, it's people that make history, and people's movements not only get governments into action, but get various institutions of society and traditions of society to change and develop and accommodate to the agitation that's going on. It's always happened. And, when people ask me, what did all the agitation of the Black Panther movement and the Race Today and other institutions of race and class do? And as well, one of the symptoms is that it allowed the new communities of Britain who came here as workers in the lowest forms of employment, in taking jobs which the white working class refused to do on the underground, in hospitals and so forth, in factories, in night shifts, right? They were workers at the lowest rung of the working class, but their children have moved into the meritocracy of Britain. And that was part of the result of the agitation that we took part of. When I came to university, there was not one person at the university from the second generation of immigrants here. We were all foreign students, one or two West Indians, but mostly Pakistanis, Africans, Indians, right? There was nobody from Birmingham or London or Bradford. Today, of course, the universities are full of students of second and third generation. And what we've enabled is the meritocracy for people to open a path into the meritocracy. Of course, it's had its bad results. It has some unfortunate results. I can name them: Rishi Sunak, Cruella Braverman, Priti Patel, James Cleverly, Kwasi Kwarteng, for God's sake. But, of course, it has also contributed to people joining the law academy, the arts, everything. So it has had a good effect also.
Yeah, thank you all for such amazing and inspiring opening statements and the conversation. I actually want to pick up a little bit on what you said, Gila, because in a Sami context, we had massive demonstrations in the 60s and 70s that ended with us getting a Sami parliament that is today funded across the national budget. Not that it's a lot of money, but we don't have, so the government has to inform us about any things that they do on our lands, but they don't need our consent, right? So I love the term domesticated our resistance, because what happened then is that when we say, but we want this, we want that, well, you have your parliament. This is really your job to do. And so when we did recently in Norway, the Sami, like we traveled in from all over the Sami, like I traveled in from the Finnish side of the borders, people came from the Swedish, the Finnish, and of course the Norwegian side of the border to do this massive demonstration in Oslo, the capital of Norway. And the Norwegian people were, you know, they came and they gave so much food to us. We would have like 34 pizzas at a time. But they didn't really, and they would say, oh, it's so awful what you're going through. We're supporting you. We're really rooting for you. But it didn't really change. And so my concern is that with this domestication of resistance, what's happened is that we are too scared of losing what we have achieved that we don't dare to do these kind of pushbacks towards the governments and the colonial forces that could help us actually go further. Because in an indigenous context, at least, we're still second-rate citizens. And I think about what Sylvia said yesterday, that where is the outrage? Where is the outrage? And so my question to you is actually very direct, and picking up on what you said, Leila, about the necessary shift that had to happen for people to get engaged. Do we need another shift today?
I think nationally and internationally, the shift is taking place. On the one hand, we have our rulers all now currently at G7 determining how we will live our lives, but there are movements and upsurges even within Britain of opposition to what's taking place. I think the difficulty with political activists is that we always want to look for the same solution of what happened in the past, and it's going to be a different solution. There's going to be different modes and different ways of organising. But the shift, I have no doubt in my mind that the era we're living through now, this really dire economic situation and what just generally is happening in the world, that we're seeing a world that is in turmoil once again, and that there are movements really wanting this change, most definitely. I think we are in a moment of shift, personally.
I got to agree with I think that that the young people, I have faith that they're gonna do something, you know, and something significant. I'm gonna be there ready to support them. Whatever they come up with, I'm gonna be there with them. Bring it on. Well, personally, I think that with democracies all over the world, they're all collapsing, you know, into fascists, into fascism all over the world. There has to be some kind of pushback to this. You know, like, we need a revolution, to be honest. Like, we need a reset. We can't just, you know, tinker with these societies. We can't have, you know, amendments to constitutions. I don't think that that's enough. You know, like, I think we need new constitutions. You know, like the old constitutions. The one in Australia is more than 120 years old. You know, like, it's inadequate for something, you know, like at the start of this century. You know, like it's inadequate. You know, like even 5 years ago. Life has changed so drastically in this very short space of time that no constitution of any country that, you know, that was formed, you know, before the 20th century, they're totally inadequate. We need, you know, new constitutions. We need new forms of, maybe the nation state, you know, they've been superseded, you know, like in power and wealth by corporations. You know, that is just outrageous. You know, like the fact that is just rolling along, yes, oh so comfortably, to me is nonsensical.
I think we recently saw a shift, though, didn't we, 2 years ago with the Black Lives Matter movement. That definitely, was, once again, was a major shift in society. I think too many people put their analysis and try to make the Black Lives Matter movement into something that it wasn't. But for me, in my 75th year, I can tell you, having thousands of young white people demanding an end to racial injustice is something I had never seen in my lifetime. When I was marching way back in the 70s, you would get the white left, maybe, some Socialist Worker Party people, but we were just met with complete hostility. To then see, after the murder of George Floyd, all over the world, people saying, we have to put an end to this kind of racialized injustice to black people, that to me was a massive shift. Sometimes political people, they just don't see a shift in society when it hits them in the face because they're too busy analyzing other things.
Just to add to what Leila was saying, in the USA, the Black Lives Movement culminated in people saying that we've come here, we've come to the USA to this point through two different histories, one through the history of slavery and the other through the history of immigration and capitalism. And now they are saying, let's those two histories merge and become one. Let's go forward. That's the shift. Let's go forward. That's why you saw huge amounts of number of white people demonstrating in all the cities of the USA and then in the different parts of the world.
Thank you. Like, yes, there are these two narratives, and then there is a third narrative that the country of the nations of the United States, of Canada, were founded on colonization. But that narrative, it seems that people aren't willing, white people in these areas aren't really willing to engage with, right? And if we talk about racialized violence, indigenous peoples are being killed in the United States, in Canada. You have the movement where the statistics show that no other race is experiencing trafficking to such a degree as women and children, indigenous women and children. But this is something, it seems, that the white settler society is not ready to face. It's much easier, it seems, to sort of neglect that part of history. And I just, yeah, I mean, I don't know.
You were asking about shifts, and I was trying to identify, having looked at the pictures, I was identifying what I thought was the beginning of a shift.
Yeah.
There's a question in the back, and then we'll come here.
Farrukh brought up Rishi Sunak's name, so let me broach the question. Can you imagine 60 years ago, Britain having a Hindu Prime Minister and a black Foreign Secretary, even if they are Tories? Certainly when my parents moved to Leicester in the 60s, they didn't. My second question is about the disparities between different groups. I think it's a mistake to treat all black and Asian people in the same pot. There's huge disparity between boys and girls and between different groups in their educational and employment outcomes. So how can those disparities be overcome?
I don't know if I care about the color of their skin, the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister. I look at their policies, which I don't quite approve of. But seeing them there is, as I was saying before, an indication that the progress of activism, agitation, and bringing to the fore the issues of society have put them in that place. We are working, the new communities of Britain are certainly working their way through the meritocracy of Britain. Britain established its meritocracy perhaps after the Second World War in a proper way. So you had, miners' sons going to Oxford and not understanding, their parents not understanding the books they'd read. That has now happened to the Black and Asian communities of Britain, people who couldn't speak English, right? Their children have become lawyers in the high courts. And that Suella and Pretty are where they are is because of that movement.
Sorry, can I would just like to add that I think it really matters, the colour of Rishi Sunak and Suella Braverman's skin, because I think in a way they use that as a way of justifying some of their policies in a way that it might not have necessarily worked in the past. I mean, I don't think we could have imagined 60 years ago that we would have a Hindu Prime Minister, but I think in a way that this discussion about meritocracy, this discussion about being in a post-racial society in a way is a double-edged sword, because it's proving that yes, you can make it, but only if you make it in a very right-wing, very conservative way. And I think that's even, I don't know, more problematic, but it's very problematic in itself, that to say, oh no, it doesn't matter whether they're Asian or Black. And I think it really does matter that they are, to me anyway. I don't know, you can have a continued discussion about it, but yeah,
Can I say something? The moment has passed, but I wanted to expand upon what Lisa said. You know, in the US, African slavery is often referred to as America's original sin. But indigenous slavery, which preceded it on Turtle Island, and genocide for indigenous land and resources are rivals for that designation. And unlike slavery, which divided the nation between pro-slavery and abolitionist states, there was no abolition movement to the taking of indigenous land. And dispossession was one project the colonies and later states all agreed upon.
More question?
Here you go, Mike.
Thanks everyone for all your work. It's so empowering. I'm curious about leadership and collectivism and how, I guess how that worked back then and how it might work today in a hyper neoliberalised kind of society. Is there anything, perhaps, I think these are the things that perhaps are lacking sometimes, whether, like how leadership works in collectives and how then people connect to achieve the collective success for society.
But I think what we have today, which we didn't have when I was around, is social media. And there are lots of different leaders growing up with these huge followings. But I think the issue, as Farrukh has said, that isn't political activism, and some people mistake it for that. But our leaders at our time were thrown up by the movement. We weren't people who went in to say we are going to lead this movement anyway. We were part of a movement, and our leadership was thrown up by that, which I think people tend to forget because everybody so concentrates on the individuals. There's no doubt that there are outstanding individuals, my husband being one of them, Farrukh really at the time being another, of people who, because of their education and understanding of the world, which was perhaps more developed than mine and other people's, were able to give us an analysis that made us move forward. But what you need are people who analyse the moment that we're living in and then being able to take that forward to another stage. And I don't think at the moment we're seeing that. A lot of it is, I mean, particularly in the discussions that I'm in, there's a lot of we are victims, we are powerless, we are, you know, I'm a victim of so many things. My race, my colour, my sexuality, my just being, my history, it was also victimizing me. Now, when we grew up, we absolutely said we are not victims, we are protagonists. And this whole perpetuation of people being victims, I think, is paralysing a lot of people as well.
Thank you all for coming. Thank you for your illuminating speeches. They were just so powerful, and recalling these things that actually happened and that you were involved in those. It's truly inspiring, even to me. So I'm nearly your age.
Probably younger.
I could be. Well, once again, thanks, and well, in the words of one of my friends, you can go now.
Hi, everyone.
Sustainably sourced packaging. We cater for all events, including weddings, birthdays, and private parties, and we hope you will enjoy the snack this afternoon.
And final thing to add is that Sofia Karim, who's going to be speaking this afternoon, has designed the packaging, which is part of her turbine bag project. So please come back at 2:30 to hear more about that work. But for now, grab some food and let's continue the conversation. Hi everyone, my name's Helen O'Malley. I'm the curator of the community program here at Tate Modern, and I'm delighted to welcome you to the final conversation of Richard Bell's Embassy. We are going to be exploring visual activism and the role that it has in shaping new political landscapes. We're honoured to be joined by Emory Douglas on Zoom. He'll be popping up just here behind me in a moment. He will be speaking about various things, but we're very, very delighted to have him. And we'll also be joined by Jacob V. Joyce and Sofia Karim to give you a little bit of information about everyone. Emory is an artist and also the former Minister of Culture for the Black Panther movement in the San Francisco Bay Area. Jacob, his work is very community anchored as well. He makes murals and illustrations and also creates music and poetry, and has collaborated with organizations such as Opal, Amnesty International, and Global Justice. And finally, Sofia. Her work combines art, architecture, and visual activism, and she's going to be speaking to her Turbine Bag platform, which is an extraordinary project that looks at human rights injustices in Bangladesh and India. So over to you, Richard, from here.
G'day, Emory.
Hey, Richard, how you doing, my brother?
Not too bad. Yeah, I'm
Good.
here in London, you know, the heart of the beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's very early over there.
Well, it's quite early, but it's okay. It's 6.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about collectivism today. Is that right? Visual activism. Oh, visual activism. Oh, geez, I know nothing about these terms and that sort of thing. Let's just have a chat about what we do. Yeah. Well, for those of you who don't know Emory, you know, he was the Minister of Culture in the Black Panther Party and the revolutionary artist. And I've been lucky enough to have befriended him in 2009 at the Sydney Biennale. And we've been doing stuff ever since. Somebody else that you know just walked in, Carolyn Christoph Bakajev.
Yes. Yeah. Our first encounter was at the Sydney Biennale when you were surprised that they let me in.
I was, because there had been another member of the Black Panther Party who was refused entry into Australia. He was supposed to go to Melbourne to speak, and he wasn't allowed in. And I thought, Jesus, how did this guy get in? You know, like,
well, it might have been because of the great curator.
I think so. You know, like, I've heard that she pulls strings. You know, like, and lots of them. You know, like in high places.
Mm-hmm.
Not like me. I got strings in low places. You know, so. How's San Francisco? You know, like last time I was there, it was pretty cold.
Well, this San Francisco it's nice. It's okay. It's global warming weather. Just like everywhere else.
Oh, so you got the aircon on.
Yeah. It can trigger any minute. It can be cold, hot, what have you. You know. Yeah. No water. Yeah.
Water everywhere.
Flooding, no flooding, all that, you know.
Yeah.
In greater context now than ever.
Yeah. Well, your work. Especially with the newspaper, you know, the Black Panther. You were the driving force behind that.
Yeah. Well, you know, that when I early on came into the Black Panther Party, I had done prior to it, I had done a image of Malcolm X for an event. They were bringing Malcolm X's wife to the Bay Area to honor her. So they want me to come to that meeting to do the poster for that event. When I came, that was Huey Newton and Bobby Steele, the co-founders of the party, and it was at a time in the context of the country when there was a lot of murders being done of young blacks and always being justified, and young people trying to find out how to deal with those issues. And so after that meeting, they agreed to do the security for that event. So after that meeting, I asked them how I could join. And going fast forward, I used to go over to Huey Newton's house and then Bobby Seals and hang out. And about going fast forward again to I was about 3.5 months after the party had started, got in. And going fast forward maybe to 4 or 5 months thereafter, they started the initial newspaper. And they said they wanted me to be the revolutionary artist of the paper, then become the minister of culture. It'll be tell our story from our perspective. Be like a double-edged sword to praise you on the one hand and criticize you on the other. And that it would, it wanted to have a lot of visuals because the community wasn't necessarily, the broad community wasn't necessarily a reading community, because they learned through observation and participation. So when they seen the artwork, they would get the gist of the story for those who were going to read the articles. And so that's what they wanted me to do, begin to do the pre-production of the newspaper. And I began to, about the third or fourth paper, begin to integrate the artwork into the paper itself. What you initially was beginning was the pig drawings that I did, that they gave me, wanted me to do an image of a pig, which I can share on the screen now in a second. And wanted me to do and this became the artwork that was the first iconic image was the pig drawing that you see here to your right, where we defined the police as a low-natured beast that had no regard for law, justice, or the right of people, a creature that bites the hand that feeds it, a foul, depraved traducer, usually found masquerading as the victim of an unprovoked attack. However, this was the first pig drawing I did, caricature, and it had, we was gonna put the badge number of the police that was abusing this power in the community, and to let the community know who it was. So it just came to me, why don't I stand it up on 2 books, keep the snort, and what have you, and then that became this image here, which began to take on a life of its own. And so that was in that, and that's because it supports your local police. Again, you had that badge number of the policeman called Black Power. And there's a film called Lowndes County, Alabama, that gives you the whole history behind the Black Panther Party and the iconic symbol of the Black Panther Party. And so these are just basically some of the images during the time, that things that took place. I have, these are historical images. Plus I do have images that are more relevant and more recent stuff that I've done, and stuff that I've done pre-Black Panther Party. So if I were to go to them, I would probably go through them quickly, but as I talk, I can show you images. But these were the first images that I'd done, the pig drawings, stuff like that. It's all the same, the local police, National Guard, Marines. You understand, this is 50, 60 years ago, and we had a vision and understood that and began to interpret it in the artwork, that there was no difference. All this comes under Homeland Security these days in this country. And so we also talk, we opposed the war in Vietnam, and here you have a little rat there as a character, avaricious U.S. imperialist and a greedy avaricious businessman winding up his toys, sending them off to war. They realized they fighting the wrong war, and they come back and turn on the U.S. imperialists. That was showing that you had a lot of GIs who came and joined the Black Panther Party after it became conscious and aware in regards to what the actions and activity and the political actions that were taking place during that time. Here we are, a caricature again, using Richard Nixon, who was the president during one period in that time, and Henry Kissinger, who was the Secretary of State during that time, and they were warmongers. And so they were trying to show this through this caricature, saying peace and going into the globe, and ha, good old American peace, and third world, Africa, Asia, Latin America. Here you got over here, you got the pig being squoze, choking. Frustrations. It's expression of frustration by the community itself and the people in general about the war that was going on, and about the exploitation, colonization of everything else that was taking place. It says, one hand says, get out of the ghetto, get out of Africa, get out of Asia, get out of Latin America, U.S. imperialists. And you go on and on, our fighters not in Vietnam, free the GIs, those things, the little avaricious businessman as a rat, everything, gold, everything eats up, it poops out, comes out in a war machine, and missiles and what have you. So this is here again. Another one which I won't speak on each of them, but you can see these earlier ones here as I show them. This is a collage of the war, and saying U.S. button says U.S. government approved the psychological impact of war, what it does to human beings. As you go on of today, you still have at least 1 to 3 to 4 veterans committing suicide from these wars right today. This was those who didn't go, we refused to go, was peace with honor. They went into exile, went to prison, went underground, and we had a whole solidarity with many of those who draft resistors. We had there was a whole connection between us and those who went over to Scandinavia. We used to go over, pastors used to go over and connect with them and talk with them all the time. We had a whole cadre of resistors over there who were our supporters. This is about Black studies, ethnic studies that were taking place, which you're trying to demonize it today and not have it allowed in any of the schools or institutions. And so this was at Cornell University when they were had boycotted in demands for ethnic studies, Black studies, and they were getting threats on their lives. So they went and got guns to protect themselves. And which was point number 7 of the 10-point platform program of the Black Panther Party, was to protect ourselves in self-defense within the Constitution of the United States. Not in violation of the Constitution, but within the Constitution, using the Constitution for that purpose. And eventually that was resolved in a favorable way. Again, here again, the pig in the middle of the Pentagon, ready for overkill. Please tell me what to stop my tennis up. I can't see no timing. And here you have the pig standing in the middle of the Pentagon, ready for overkill. And this was 1968. There's a lot of things happening in 1968. That's what they call a lot of events took place. So you had a pig ready for overkill with a blood-sucking vulture on the butt of the gun, dollar bills drooling out the mouth, the eyes, a hand grenade in the other hand, a lynching rope in one. And in New Haven, Connecticut, you had Bobby Seale and Erica Huggins, Panthers who were set up by the U.S. government by agent provocateurs when the Panther was murdered, and they were eventually exonerated of those charges. And it was shown that the agent provocateurs was the one who committed the crime. You had at Kent State, at Kent, Ohio, at Kent University, you had 4 white students who were murdered protesting against the war in Vietnam, shot by the National Guard. In Augusta, Georgia, and Jackson, Mississippi, you had in other Black campuses, you had Blacks who were actually on battlefield fighting against the police and authorities in those universities. You had the war in Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and the struggle of the Palestinians and Laos and other places going on during that time. 1968, John Carlos and Tommy Smith, who went to the Olympics and gave the Black Power sign during that time, which they were, when you did the mural, our initial first mural on that, regarding with Peter Norman in it, who was in solidarity, the white runner from Australia who ran second in that race and was in solidarity with John Carlos and Peter and John Carlos and with John Carlos and the other brother in the race.
Tommy Smith.
During that time.
Tommy Smith.
Yeah, Tommy Smith. You know, I'm getting old, so I get a lapse every now and then.
Yeah, but I get that too.
Yeah. And so this was 4 years later at the Olympics, and the protests continued. A lot of people know that. This guy right here, Vince Matthew and Wayne Collette ignored tradition at Munich Olympics. What they did is they just stood there when the Olympics was national anthem. They played, they won, but they just at ease. They didn't cry crocodile tears. They didn't have, when the flag was playing, they didn't have the hand over their heart, all that kind of stuff. They just stood there. So I did that interpretation on the back of that paper, of this image here, at ease. Same title as the paper it was. It was a symbolic defiance of the showing, protesting against the human rights violations against the African-American community in this country. And again, they got on the ground, they run the race, they come to stand up on the podium, and when it's over and they go back home, a nigger is a nigger is a nigger. It don't matter if you're an Olympian, or you're a doctor, or you're a lawyer. If you were black in America, you were profiled. They had a case that over 600,000 blacks in this country had been profiled. And there was the last, that was in the state of New York alone, where they had to solve that case by legally acknowledge that that was taking place and to resolve it. And they had to, because what was happening, you had a survey that came out that showed that only about 1% of those people of color, predominantly black, who they claim were carrying illegal weapons, contraband, didn't have anything. But 40% of the white, who they didn't ever try to search for anything, carried contraband. This is a solidarity with the United Farm Workers to the right when Chavez was marching to the state capitol to protest against the lettuce and chemicals that were harming the farm workers in the fields, the pesticides, the chemicals. And we showed our support by doing this image here. There's a lot more to it. But then this one over here is La Siete de la Raza, 7 Latino brothers who couldn't get any support. They were charged with the murder of a San Francisco policeman. With one police shot the other, and they got charged with it when they were taking some furniture into the house, and was totally disrespected for who they were as human beings. And they couldn't get any support. So they came to us, and we agreed. We shared about 7 or 8 of our papers with them. Part of it, our paper was their Los Bastillas. The other part was our paper. We got them a lawyer, and eventually they were exonerated of the cases. Can you imagine if they didn't have the kind of support, they would have probably still be in prison today, or they would have been electrocuted, murdered. Here again, here's one showing when they used to take up when they were going unmanned into space, and I did just what called At Last, white only. Then 50 years later, with Trump, would be the same thing, white only. Here again is one that says, whatever's good for the oppressor has got to be bad for us. And here you got up to the pig spaceship up on the planet, and you got the pig coming out on the deck saying, hey, handle those slaves with care. We're gonna need it for Mars, Pluto, and all those other planets. And then you have slaves off the ship onto the planet. Hey, I knew we should have stopped this ship before it got off the ground. And then you have the pig over to the right with the pick and the shovel saying, okay, goddammit, don't take 400 years this time. That's in regard to the blacks who helped develop this country to what it is. And to your right is the Sonia Sanchez, well-known poet, famous poet. I did the first cover of her poetry book called Homecoming. Could be any place in America or the world today, you know. We want decent housing, fit for the shelter of human beings. That's one of the 10 points of the Black Panther Party platform and program. All the artwork is a reflection of our ideological, philosophical perspective and what we were involved in these social programs, and pointing out the contradictions about the living and condition and the quality of life issue concerns that the community had that weren't being given any attention to, that the government should have been assisting with. Here again. Others, I'm gonna go flash so you can just see them. Some of them, time is of the essence, so you can get a look at some of them. We registered folks to vote, but we've talked about voting for survival. We've talked about vote for free health care. We vote for alternative school education. That touches gives us some historical context about ourselves and our day and the technology in our day and our place in this present day society. When we talked about politics, people having a right to quality of life issues. Again, food, health, shelter, all those things, education. We supported the first black woman in this age in the state United States to run for president was Shirley Chisholm, was a black woman, and we supported her. And this was a vote for Chisholm is a vote for survival. Here's all power to the people, the many social programs that we have to see reflected in the back of the artwork itself. Free health clinics. We have the sickle cell anemia tested, predominantly disease that probably impacted the African American community here in the United States. And we did over 100,000 free testing of people who had that disease and didn't know it, and it's just a prick. Along with doctors, we had alternative free health clinics where we had professional doctors who came in, and we had chapters and branches across the country, 49 chapters and branches that dealt with those issues. That's what we call it, Black genocide, sickle cell anemia. And this is like enlightening and educating about that issue, about the disease, as you see the collage of us doing the testing inside the, inserted into the artwork to give another layer and meaning and depth to the artwork itself. This is a young man, and all the, we dealt with the disability, with the handicap. This is a brother named Brad Lomax, who was a handicap in the party. And we worked with the Center for Independent Living. We had rallies at our schools and at our community center with many of the disability folks. And we were part of why you have the access in this country for those who had disability, with the streets, with the rails, when you go into buildings and all those things. That we contributed to that in the Black Panther Party. Also, this was about the 1939 when they had the syphilis and there was no cure for it. And they got these black sharecroppers who basically couldn't read or write, who was sharecroppers from the South. And they gave them $50 a piece, a lot of money, to be in the test. 7 years later, in 1947, they were in, but they went in and out by 1939, somewhere around there. In 1947, they had a cure for it. It was penicillin. But they didn't give it to them. They kept them in the program until I think it was around 1970, somewhere around in there. And
Emory.
Can you imagine? Yes.
Yeah. I just got the signal. 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, what I'll do is I'll just show so you can see the image.
Yeah.
How about that? Okay. There you go. You know, the Cuban artists remixed some of my images. That's the one to the left where they remix it. Again, another one of mine, solidarity with the African American people. These are the historical images that you're seeing now. You know, that's the one. This is one I worked on with Spike Lee doing the. This is not the one of Spike Lee, but the one for the murder of Fred Hampton that I redesigned. There's a lot of, the reason why I may be rambling because of the shortness, but there's a lot of historical context that I do give behind these images. And we are solidarity with the original caretakers of the land, AIM, the American Indian Movement, acknowledged that they started because of being inspired by the Black Panther Party. These are more recent images, reinterpretation of the remixes of images I've done. Malcolm X, Dr. King, sharecroppers, just people in the community with text in the papers dealing with today's news and context of things, don't support the greedy, all these kinds of things, fossil fuel, dealing with global warming, all the dangers, what have you, educate to liberate, survival, pending revolution, the programs that I talked about, Turtle Island, North America, indigenous territory. All this is called Turtle Island. This is indigenous territory. Here again, health is wealth. And then health is wealth. I like to say, yes, non-toxic. Here again, dealing with little people against colonialism. You know, I am, we, this was a reinterpretation. This was Kaepernick, the brother who took the knee in the foot, because he refused to stand for the national anthem. Yeah, I'm homeless. I'm food insecure. Let me know, just tell me to stop and I will.
30 seconds.
Okay. This is reparations. Yeah. You are a slave of him whose handcuffs you wear. That's a Negro symbol.
Yeah.
Fashion xenophobe, white only, ice cold wickedness, made in America, Trump, the shithole president, Arab Muslim Islam, U.S. government coded word for terrorist, hate, discrimination, blackmail, U.S. government coded word for hate, discriminate, kill.
I think you're done.
Okay, very good.
Sorry to cut you off, brother, but
no, that's fine. It's all good. I'm going over the program.
sorry I had to colonize your time.
That's okay.
Okay.
We'll work it out. We'll deal with it.
Okay. Thank you, brother. I hope to see you later in the year.
Okay.
I'll get your way.
Okay.
Okay. See ya.
Okay.
Emery's going to stay online while we see Jacob and
Oh,
Sofia's
okay.
presentation, and then we'll be back for the conversation.
Oh, who talking first?
Jacob is.
Oh.
So I think they're just going to take a minute to get your slides up.
Okay. So my name's Jacob V. Joyce. I am an artist from South London. For clarification, my pronoun is them and they. It's not a big deal at all, just for clarification. And it's funny that, Richard, you said that when you saw Emory at the Sydney Biennale, you were surprised that he was able to get in. Yes. And he said, well, it was because of curator. I think that's often the case, is that that art gives us a little bit of a backdoor entrance to get some radical politics into spaces where radical politics maybe wouldn't usually get in. So this is a mural in Marcus Garvey Park in Hammersmith and Fulham called the Wall of Respect for Women Who Resisted Racism in Britain and its colonies. And when I was commissioned by Transport for London to paint this mural, I said it was going to be in the style of William Morris, and I said it was going to be, you know, I didn't say it was going to be a timeline of women who fought against the British Empire, because I thought that actually once you're in the door, then you can have that conversation. And this park is situated between two schools who now use the mural as a learning resource. And what I wanted to do was be able to invite those children to understand that the British Empire is a complicated history. It's a complicated assortment of contrasting histories, and there have been so many different incredible people who have resisted its more violent and coercive and sinister energies over the years. But to give some context, I didn't paint this mural alone. And the reason why it's called the Wall of Respect is because of the Wall of Respect, which was painted during the Harlem Renaissance by artists like Jeff Donaldson and members of AfriCobra, which stands for the African Coalition of Bad Relevant Artists, which I think is such a cool name. But yeah, I see myself as one of many artists who's part of a long tradition of community and collective anti-racist action. So when I got this commission, I reached out to lots of different Black British artists and asked them to join me in painting it and give them different sections. So I was joined by Shola Olode, by Richard Ikede, by Rudy Lowe, by Elsa Yexley, by Buki Bayode. And the mural features people like Nanny of the Maroons, who sometimes is featured in British curriculums, but it also features people like Sanit Belair, who was a young revolutionary member of the Haitian Revolution. It features Nahanda Nayahasi Sinkana and Ya Asantewa, Nahanda Nayahasi Sinkana being the spiritual leader of the Chimurenga resistance, and Ya Asantewa being the Queen Mother in Ghana of the Ashanti people who also fought against the British. And when you learn about these histories and these women, you can't really get away from the cruel nature of colonialism. And I wanted to make a resource that kind of did that, but did it in a fun way. So I just thought I'd start by talking about that mural. And it also features Claudia Jones, of course. Can I click through? Is it this way? How do I do this? Okay, cool. All right, yeah. And then also for me, murals are living archives. And I guess the reason why I like mural painting is because I think that as much as I think institutions like the Tate are important, I think they have a weird energy to them. There's an energy inside gallery spaces. There's something clinical and something quite sterile about the space. And I think when you paint murals, it's just out and about in the community. So on the left here is a poet, P.J. Samuels, who's an amazing Jamaican queer poet. And on the right is Belinda Zawi, who's an amazing South African poet. And when we launched this mural, we invited them to come and speak and kind of contextualize the energies within this work in a way that the community could engage with in a fun way that didn't seem too formalized, I suppose. We also invited a local band, Taxi Pata Pata, who are a Congolese Pan-African band. I absolutely love these photos. The image credits aren't showing, but these photos are taken by a photographer called Kojo Apengi. For me, murals are outside, they're in communities, they're spaces of celebration and community, and we can have pakoras and we can have like a bit of music, but at the end of the day, this is still an institution and we will have to get out at some point, do you know what I mean? It has that kind of energy to it. But I like being able to make stuff that there's no barriers to get in. No one can tell you to leave. You can see it whenever you want. And so, yeah, some more pictures. And obviously it's Marcus Garvey Park. So there's a quote there from Marcus Garvey: "A people without the knowledge of their past history and origin and culture is like a tree without roots." And I think, also Marcus Garvey is a really important figure, but my work generally tends to focus on women and queer people and people who are often left out of the story. So I was so excited to hear Leila and Farrukh speak earlier about all of the activism in Brixton, especially because as one of the artists who painted the Wall of Respect for Radical Histories of Railton Road, I've been learning about these histories for a really long time, and I wanted to just quickly tell an anecdotal story of something that happened in Brixton that really, really radicalized me when I was about 21. And there was an exhibition at Photo Fusion, photographs of Black Panthers, and I went to see it, and there was a woman walking around the exhibition, and she was like, "Oh, this is me, and this is the work we were doing," and it was a woman called Althea Jones-LeCointe, and she was talking about all of the different histories, and what she was saying was so interesting, but when she finished, everybody in the gallery instinctively started clapping for her. And she said, "Don't clap for me. I'm not entertaining you. I'm talking about these things because these things need to be spoken about." And I said at the time, well, I think it's just weird for us because we don't hear people speaking like that. And I think that all of those issues still persist, but we just don't really know how to speak about them. And she said, well, then you need to learn how to speak about them, and you need to keep speaking about them, and you need to organize around them, or kind of incited us to do that. And it really did, and it led me to kind of like organize events and become more involved in activism and try and make work which I hope incites people or gives somebody a framework, gives people a framework to talk about these things. So some of the histories featured in the mural, in the Radical Histories of Railton Road, include lots of different activist groups that were based in the area. And I want to tell you this as well, a little story, because I'm going to try not to speak too much, but I think things stay in my head when they're stories. So the Railton Road mural was painted to celebrate the 40-year anniversary of the 1981 Brixton Uprising. And when I was doing the research to find out about as much as I could about the 1981 uprising, I was in the archives, which you should all visit. There's a fantastic archive in Elephant Castle called 56A, which is the archive of squatting and housing history. And I found the logbook for 121 Books, which is the bookshop which was squatted by Olive Morris and Liz Obey. It was originally called Sabar Books, is my understanding, and then it later became 121 Books. And I've typed it up somewhere, what this says, because it's obviously hard to read the handwriting. But what it is the logbook from the day of the Brixton Uprising. I'm going to see if I can get up and read it. it says meeting at 3 p.m. today. Oh no, this is it. Brixton is under siege at the moment. Cops patrolling up and down Railton Road and a semi-riot happening Friday evening. People out on the streets, 8 p.m. with shields. And what's really interesting, I can't read this handwriting, I'm not gonna try and read it all, and I don't have the typed up version, is what it says is that the police actually were smashing people's windows. And it also says that the riots happened because the police were stalking people and stalking a young black boy and stopping him from getting medical attention, which is a really different version of the story that I've heard in other places. But what I love about this is that a week after the riots, the uprising, there's an entry that says, we had a meeting today and the community were all saying it'd be great to have a mural celebrating this, which I just think is amazing that it took 40 years, but we did it. And yeah, so as you can see in the mural there, we've got the fire breather and the stick fighter, because weirdly, 100 years before the Brixton uprisings, there was actually the Camboulet uprising, which is in Trinidad and Tobago, when the people of Trinidad and Tobago had the Emancipation Day celebrations, which were tied into celebrations of harvest rituals, masquerade, things that are very spiritual, but also about actual relationships with the land. So burning the sugar cane to get rid of pests and scorpions and stuff like this. So they had all of these kind of rituals to do with the land, to do with ancestors, to do with remembering history. And the police, the colonial bastard police, who led by Captain Baker, said we're not allowing them to do it this year. We're not allowing the people of Trinidad and Tobago to have this procession. And luckily, the Calypsonians were singing songs saying, the police are going to try and stop this from happening, and the word spread and people knew. So when the police came and tried to stop it happening, people rose up against the police, and they rose up so successfully, they beat down the police so successfully, men, women, and children, that there was mass resignations of the police the next day. And what's fantastic about that is that every year in Trinidad and Tobago, they now have, the Camboulet uprising. Oh, do I not have photos of it? Oh, well, you have to go online and have a look and Google Camboulet. So every year there is a historical reenactment that happens of Camboulet, and it is fantastic. It's a massive 5 in the morning ceremony where people reenact a massive battle against the police, and it's beautiful. But yeah, so I wanted to include that history in the mural as well, because the Brixton Uprising and Camboulet are both historical instances of communities rising up against white supremacist police violence and brutality. There's also Darkest Hours featured in the mural, Olive Morris, the firefighters who took the knee in solidarity with Black Lives Matter in 2020, in the 2020 kind of summer when everyone suddenly cared about black people. There's references to lots of different histories, and there's a key here. So you can go on the 198 Gallery website and find out about all those histories. And then just to kind of finish up, this is the most recent mural that I painted, which is actually in East London in Aldgate, and celebrates a lot of the histories that Farrukh was talking about, which is why if you saw my face, I was like, oh my God, because there's just been so many amazing community activist histories in Whitechapel and in Tower Hamlets in general. And to give you a little bit of context of how I work, the mural, that mural, which is by Aldgate East Station, some of the research that was done to create it was going into school next to the mural and asking children to kind of imagine what I actually did was I told them that aliens were coming to their school. I said, listen, kids, aliens are coming into your school at the end of the week. And some of them don't like the food at the school, some of them get quite scared of loud noises, some of them speak a different language, but we want to redesign the school to be a space that feels more welcoming to them. And then through drawing exercises, they redesigned their school, and then myself and a group of artists came in dressed as aliens. So you can see us there in these inflatable suits. And it was hilarious. It was very funny pretending to be aliens to like 6-year-olds. But anyway, so I just mentioned that because, and then there was also workshops of local homeless groups making seeds, making seed bombs and doing all kinds of things. I don't want to try and squeeze too much in, but I just thought it's not just about making local history, celebrating local histories, it's also about making sure that the communities that you're working with understand that they're part of that process. And I think what I like about murals, specifically murals with children and for children, is that it means something when you can see your landscape transforming around you. And yeah, that's what I hope to kind of like, I don't know, I'm rambling a bit now. But anyway, I'm gonna leave it there. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you so much, Richard. We just had so many fantastic conversations downstairs, so I'm excited to hear what you have to say and be in conversation with you about it.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay. Thanks. We're actually at an extremely dangerous point in history. India, the world's largest so-called democracy, a nation of mostly brown people, has turned into a Hindu nationalist, fascist state with relative ease. That is ominous, and it should be a lesson to the world. So the risk to 200 million Muslims, so 250 million would be something like the fifth largest country in the world numerically. So the risk to 200 million Muslims, and experts warn of genocide now in India, and other minorities in India cannot be overstated. Meanwhile, its neighboring country, Bangladesh, has slid into authoritarianism, torture, extrajudicial killings, enforced disappearances commonplace. So how much do you know about this? I don't know. How much do we know about this? I mean, we know about China, we know about Russia, we know about Iran, fair enough. But what do we know about the nations our own governments are in bed with, the largest so-called democracy of the world? Because, you know, for all our governments talk about being against religious extremism or fundamentalism, the illegal wars and illegal occupations it's wielded in our names, to me it seems that it's quite comfortable with certain forms of fundamentalism or supremacy, so long as it aligns with its needs. Now, the work I'm going to talk about today, which actually in some senses begins as a subversion of this place, the Tate Modern, and who gets to show in a place like this, which we'll come to. The work comes from artists from India and Bangladesh who are fighting an extremely difficult fight. And I really wish they could be here today, but they're not, because they're at the coalface. Yesterday, I watched all of you eating from those samosa packets, which some of you might have had for lunch. On packets was Professor Sai Baba, 90% disabled, solitary confinement, life sentence in India. His organs are failing. There was Jasmine, a single mum who died of a brain hemorrhage after being interrogated in RAB police custody. And people were eating and not even looking at the packets or throwing them away. And I felt a terrible loneliness, actually, when that happened. So I went home last night and I thought about it. And I was like, you know, it's me as well. I missed a trick there. Tomorrow I'll do something different. So today, while people were eating here, I went and I spoke to them. And I said, while you're eating, can you make a wish for the freedom of that prisoner or peace to their tormented soul? And actually, that's what I'm asking you guys today. Yeah, this is about art, activism, analysis, meaning, theory, all these debates about power structures. But I suppose what I'm asking you is something stranger than that. Please just make a wish for the souls of those who we're fighting for the freedom of India's BK-16, who had false evidence planted on their laptop accusing them of plotting to assassinate Narendra Modi, Professor Sai Baba, Umar Khalid, others. And maybe with us today is 84-year-old Jesuit priest and tribal activist, Father Stan Swami, who died in custody. Maybe he is here with us. Because if half of you, 5 of you, or 1 of you even make that wish for me, that's something. I'm very excited to be with Jacob and sharing a platform with Emory Douglas. The Black Panther movement was, of course, the springboard for the Dalit Panther movement in 1972, part of the vast and ongoing anti-caste movement in India. Thank you. Peace be upon you. Okay.
Pardon?
I've got to do a little presentation, but I'm going to read it from my phone because it's easier. Have I got time? Yeah. Okay. So first slide. In February 2018, I bought some samosa on the streets of Dhaka, Bangladesh. The packet intrigued me. It was made from waste printouts of court lists, endless cases filed by the state against citizens. Next. Yeah, could you do next? Thank you. Entranced by this packet, I began to collect more. Constructed from throwaway papers, letters, corporate emails, official documents, kids' homework, poems, news, court lists, they painted a portrait of a country. Few months later, my uncle, photographer and activist Shahidul Alam, was jailed by the government of Bangladesh after reporting on student protests which had gripped the country. Next. Yeah, that one. As part of the global campaign for his release, I reached out to Cuban artist and activist Tanya Bruguera, who I think maybe you know. Yeah. So she had her commission at the Turbine Hall. I didn't know her. A Peruvian friend had her direct message and he messaged her. Next thing, she said, come to the museum. We staged 2 free Shahidul protest exhibitions at Tate Modern Turbine Hall. We displayed Shahidul's Crossfire series of photos on extrajudicial killings in Bangladesh. News reached Shahidul in jail about the exhibition. He smiled. After 107 days incarceration, he was released. And I remember his partner told me, that's probably one of the most subversive things that's happened in the rarefied halls of a place like Tate Modern. I mean, to get a Turbine Hall, you'd probably have to wait months and be a famous artist and God knows what. So now I had access to this place, I'm not letting go. In December 2019, India was in the grip of mass protests sparked by proposed citizenship laws discriminating against Muslims, imposed by the BJP, the Hindu nationalist ruling party led by Narendra Modi. At the epicenter of the resistance was Shaheen Bagh, Delhi, a sit-in led by Muslim women. Shaheen Bagh was the biggest women's resistance movement of our time, but few in the UK even know about it. I mean, I think of like how everyone knows about Iran protests. Good, so you should. But I've hardly met anyone who knows about Shaheen Bagh. If these women had been defending Sharia law or cutting their hair or pulling off their hijabs, you'd damn well have heard about it. It would have been in every newspaper. I wanted to raise awareness. Shaheen Bagh challenges not only patriarchy, but also Western stereotypes of the Muslim woman. I've seen nothing as progressive in current Western feminism. Together with local activists, some here, we planned a protest in the Turbine Hall in solidarity with Shaheen Bagh. Bagh means garden. Our action was called Turbine Bagh. We decided to use samosa packets as a form of protest art. After the event, they would be sent to Shaheen Bagh. We launched an Instagram platform and called out to artists. That's my mum and my daughter. Next. Many artists began to contribute, poets, writers, filmmakers, and musicians too. Some of the ones that are made, and we campaigned for political prisoners. Then COVID came, 3 days before the protest. Tate Modern had to shut. The Shaheen Bagh protest site was shut down by the Indian government, but our work continued. Photojournalist Kajol was disappeared in Bangladesh. We began campaigning. So it made it to the Bangladeshi news. And then soon artists from all over the world, next slide, thanks, started making stuff. So this was an artist, Sadie Bridger, and she made her own packets and put them outside the Met in New York. And what I loved was that these aren't even political artists. Like I had mums in Ireland who were suddenly following my work and knowing more about Bangladesh and India politics than many of the diaspora here. Packets were made for causes around the world and for political prisoners. So these are by American photographers, Robert Gerhard, who's been documenting Black Lives Matter and Muslim lives in America, I think since 2014, and John Trotter and his photos of Yemenis in Brooklyn protesting against Donald Trump's Muslim ban. India, so Shaheen Bagh and the protests against the hijab ban. Bangladesh anti-rape protests, and interestingly, we did an event at Coventry Cathedral, which was really radical last week, and on the altar they put these anti-rape protest packets. Nepalese struggles, Sri Lanka, and here, UK for Palestine and the killing of Shirin Abu Akleh. With each exhibition, we try and achieve a tangible outcome. Peckham 24, we focus on the BK16 prisoners in India. We sent the packets to jail, and the prisoners wrote back. They're on display at the Herbert in Coventry, and kids are making them there. And at Documenta 15, we focused on the cases of Sai Baba and Anand Teltumde, who is the defender of the Dalits. We asked visitors to sign letters calling for their release, effectively asking them to wish, as I just did ask you. They did. They wrote letters which went all over the gallery. And then 2 months later, Professor Anand Teltumde was released. Not just because of what I did by any means, there's millions of people involved in these struggles. So that I got a photo of him the next day at home holding the book of letters. And I'll just read what I wrote to him. Dear Anand, you're released from prison. I see you in this photograph at home holding the book of letters. Now art, that curious, intangible thing whose purpose so many have questioned, speaks back to me from a place beyond logic or definition. I'll carry this feeling to the end of this life and beyond. Hugs to you and those still inside from me at the thin place. That's pretty much it. I just wanted to show a small video of the activists I work with. Yeah, it's just coming. Just so that you know the kind of stuff we're doing around here. So this video is a protest that was organized on 2020 Human Rights Day. Oh no, is it all there? Can I zoom forward? I don't need me. Yeah. Okay,
Modi is doing, that the world is watching, and that the diaspora is not with Modi, that the diaspora is united against fascism. We're standing with the farmers' movements. We're inspired by the incredibly heroic protests in Shaheen Bagh and now by the farmers. And one more thing, Boris Johnson, we know that you may not know the difference between farmers' protests and India-Pakistan conflicts, but we in the diaspora do know the difference, and we are solidly behind the farmers.
Today is International Human Rights Day. In India, Modi's government is violating human rights. It's 1 year since the Islamophobic CAA was passed. This violates India's secular constitution. The CAA, Citizen Amendment Act, is a way of targeting the whole Muslim population in India and potentially disenfranchises them. In other words, it's a pathway to ethnic cleansing. Love jihad will be used to attack Muslim men and take away all freedom of choice from Hindu women. There have already been cases in UP, Uttar Pradesh, which show the grotesque Islamophobia at work here. These two laws taken together are almost identical to Hitler's Nuremberg laws, which were passed in a prelude to the genocide. It's been a year of resistance in India, culminating in the mass protests by farmers against Modi's corporate takeover of agriculture. We stand in solidarity with all those resisting fascism in India. The world is watching. Modi may think that Indians in the UK support him, but we're here to tell him that's not the case. And the numbers of people who are uniting against fascism in India is growing every day and everywhere.
1 minute. Keval is from South Asia Solidarity Group who did that protest. Just 1 minute, because he wants to talk about the corporate enablers of Modi who are taking indigenous land in India, but also in Australia.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'm not going to be too long. The action that you just saw was organized by a collective that I'm part of called South Asia Solidarity Group. We're a UK-based organization that have been going since the 1970s, actually. One of the things that we try to do is to link up politics and art and activism. So we've been working with Sofia for a long time now. Recently, you probably would have seen that the third richest man in the world was Adani. You may have heard his name. He was embroiled in the world's largest scandal, corporate fraud. It's important to understand that a lot of the issues that we're trying to face have a material power. They come from the system. And how do people enact that power? And it does come from the government. If you think about what happened to India in 1991 was mass liberalization of its economy. India used to have largely state-owned assets, but now 90% of them are into the hands of a few private people who then fund Modi to ramp up a whole heap of injustices in order to carry on the profit motive. So the work that we try to do is to highlight that in the UK. Please go and have a look at our website, South Asia Solidarity Group. One of the things that I think one of my favorite quotes of all time is the job of the artist is to make the revolution irresistible. I really, really, really like that. And I think today I've definitely heard that. And if in terms of coming to a point where we can understand that, some of the work that we've also done is on a website called Revolutionary Reparations. And that talks about Adani, that talks about the way in which governments give power to corporates and really kind of burst the bubble that we don't really live in a democracy. We live in a capitalist autocracy. Thank you.
There is. We'll now open up for questions. Any questions? We've been joined by Emory as well, so.
You mentioned a man called Adani. Yeah. Mr. Adani is the one of the protagonists of coal mine development in northern Queensland, in the Galilee Basin area in Queensland, and taking over Aboriginal lands. Adrian Birragubba, one of the elders who are leading the charge, and our efforts is go and squat on the land and make sure that this man does not do anything, except the Queensland government are behind Mr. Adani and the federal government, and they're making laws and forcing these guys into into courts, so that they can protect Adani's interest. And I understand that there are parts in India as well where Adani is doing his coal mining and operations, and I think there are efforts to try and stop him from operating in Bangladesh and other countries throughout that northern area.
That mine is the size of Tasmania, open cut mine that is just bigger than the city of London, and quite the surrounds. So that's the kind of the size of this thing, and it's if it goes ahead, it will destroy the Great Barrier Reef. So.
Yeah, it's the Carmichael mine, isn't it? The name, the Carmichael mine. And in India, one of the largest prime virgin forests called the Hasdao forest, which is where indigenous people live, Adivasis, have been murdered. By essentially paramilitary forces under the behest of the government. It's a rampant human rights abuses that actually we can't get justice through the courts. And it's important to remember that Adani is part of a global system of commodities, consumption and extractivism. There's JCB diggers in India, there's JCB diggers in Palestine, there's JCB diggers in Australia. So it's important to remember that, how can we get justice on stolen land? And that's what revolutionaryreparations.org, that website tries to unpack.
Could I ask Emory a question? Emory, this is Jacob. I don't know if you can see me. But yes, so I work with a lot of mural painters, and we're all very inspired by your work and your style. So it's amazing to be in conversation with you. I have a question about being an artist who makes kind of radical work, and it's about funding. So how important do you think it is? So for the Radical Histories of Railton Road mural that I mentioned in the presentation, we raise money from the community to paint it. But then often when you're doing this kind of work, the money's coming from an institution or a local council or someone who's got their own ideas about what you should and shouldn't be saying. And obviously my understanding, well, not obviously, but my understanding is the Black Panther Party that you guys were raising your own funds and stuff. So how important do you think it is to kind of retain a level of authenticity in radical work, that the funding doesn't come from institutions and instead it comes from community and efforts that you take on yourself?
Well, it's important that as long as you control the narrative. Mm-hmm. If someone wants to donate from an institution, then they have to be willing to do it in the context of supporting the narrative, not anything less than that. I've had murals that I've done in the past or contributed to that you've had the museums and others people who worked there who supported it, curators who supported it and helped get the funding for it. In that context, if the narrative is highly provocative, then it stays as it is, provocative. It's not, it can't be changed, as long as it can't be changed or what have you. But then there is bad money, and that's a fact. So you have to determine what's good and what's bad in the context of how you want to, and you got to be able to explain that to your comrades, to your friends, to those who want to know about that as well. But but it's just the fact that you have to behave, your art, your view, if it wants to be supported, you welcome it. If you choose to. If not, don't do it.
Thank you. That makes so much sense.
Well, all money's dirty. So, like, I take money from the Australian government. You know, they've been involved in some illegal wars. You know, I think your government here is as well. So, you know, for me, you know, like, it's about the narrative. You know, like, as long as they don't interfere with that, you know, give it to me, give it to me, give it to me.
Because you're dealing with people who are in these institutions, who have a consciousness about them. You have people in the institution who are in a position sometimes to help you get the what's needed to deal with whatever it is that you're trying to do. So that means that they're progressive-minded, open-minded, or see it as a part of the context of historical context that needs to be shared and what have you. So you didn't have those elements in the past, but you do have them now, because perhaps there were young people who were listening to the narrative when it was being spoken, were family members of somebody who they knew, or were involved in a social justice consciousness themselves or within their family or what have you. So now they carry that on in the context of the work that they do in the way that they can. So it's nothing absolute. It's not either or. It's relative.
It's not a binary.
Yeah.
Any more questions?
Hello. I just wanted to say how amazing it has been to be in the tent today and yesterday. And I feel like a lot of us agree that there have been some extraordinary discoveries found amongst the conversation. And there seems to be a few threads that have come through. And one in particular I wanted to ask yourselves and any of the previous panelists about, which is about when do you ignore the laws that were never written to protect you? What are your reflections on when to respect them and when to work in opposition to them? It would be really wonderful to hear what your reflections are on that.
Well, I can just because it just resonates with something that that Emory just said, and in terms of people on the inside, you know, I mean, they recently changed the laws in the UK around education, so you're not allowed to teach about Black Lives Matter and so-called victim narratives, but teachers still do. Do you know what I mean? Teachers always, there's so many people within education who say, I'm going to find a way to make this part of the curriculum because I think it's important for the young people to know about this. And I think that also NHS workers and public sector workers, people are constantly being put in positions where they have to actually bend the rules to protect people and bend the rules because they know that the limitations that have been put on them by the state don't reflect any kind of morality. They're to do with funding and they're to do with private interests. So, you know, it's maybe not the best place to talk about when you should break the law, but I believe that everybody's already breaking the law all the time. And I see that as a carer for a disabled parent. I see the healthcare workers who are, well, I'm not really meant to do this, but I can see your mum needs this. Do you know what I mean? People are always bending the rules because they have a soul. You know what I mean? And we live in a soulless place as the heart of the empire, you know. So.
Just want to say to that question, Australia is a country that was built by thieves. Yeah, they sent down all the prisoners from here, and of course it wasn't the prisoners who stole our land; it It was the free settlers who came down, the wealthy people, who then got licenses to get the convicts to go out and work for them. The convicts went out and squatted on our lands, and then they went out and shot our people just to clear the land under the scorched earth policy. And so when we talk about Australia and we talk about resisting, we're resisting a thief. And of course, the thief now is the judge in those courts, and they get appointed by the thieves themselves. And so trying to fight that sort of regime is quite a challenge. And when you read the court decisions in Australia, you begin to realise how the thief thinks. And of course, that thief is operated from here. The puppeteer is over here in Buckingham Palace, or they still are. And unfortunately, the Parliament that sits here sits idly by, knowing that the thieves and the operators and the puppeteer continue the same old regimes, and we have to begin to break that down.
I'm banned, yeah. So just to add to that, I think, so from my perspective, in the context of where I live and move, there are two judicial systems. One that's operated on a very colonial logic, and then it's one that's operating on the logic of continuing to dispossess us from the land and from the practices of our ancestors. And I think the law is broken every day by us when we go fishing in a place that we're told we're not allowed to fish. When we continue to work against oppression. And I think it's important to remember that breaking the law is not so much about systems, it's also about people. And it's about being able or wanting to live the life that you foresee future generations being able to live. And in that sense, often to commit, to break the law is actually a matter of survival, even though the legal system doesn't necessarily understand that. But at one point, it is also a question about committing yourself and making the decision of wanting to be a part in moving the future of your people forward, or if you want to be part of the system trying to erase that future. And I think for me, I will always be on that side of wanting to continue to break the law if necessary.
I'm not going to say anything on camera.
Thank you so much to everyone. I've really enjoyed today and yesterday. I guess I have a question for anyone who spoke or any of the panelists here, which is, I guess, how do you stay active? How do you stay an activist? How do you stay with all of this work? I guess over time, because I feel like what I see amongst my peers is either, complete exhaustion and burnout and disengaging, or, sort of entering into these systems, hoping to change them, and then sort of becoming subsumed, and then, changing, people changing because they're in the system. I'm just wondering if anyone has any reflections about that or strategies, advice.
It's epigenetic. It's built within us. Yeah. From the day we're born, you're either a fighter or you're a submitter. Yeah. And no matter how difficult the challenge may be, the fact is that you're born into something that you commit yourself to. And Even when you try to get out of it, like I have on many occasions, I thought I was going to go wonderful and become very rich. Yeah, and I had the potential to do that, and then all of a sudden I got sucked back into it somehow, and I'm broke and walking around with the ass out of my trousers.
Actually, I think for me, so I have, I have a list of friends on WhatsApp that live in different parts of the world that every time something happens, I will reach out to them and say, I need to bitch, or I need to rant, or I need to cry. And I think the important thing to remember is the collectivity, that because you are committed to sort of fighting for something that is bigger than yourself, it means that you're not alone. And I think when I look at the Western world and the structures that I see in the West, and I teach at, I work at the university, I teach students that come to me desperate because I'm not sure if I'm good enough, I don't know if I can do this, I feel like, what am I even doing here? I'm a fraud. And I recognize that sense, that feeling comes from living in an individual society where you're alone, where you are responsible alone. In a Sami society, you're part of a collective. So you know that no matter what you do, you will always have people behind you. Even if you do something horrific, instead of, we don't punish people in the sense that we exclude them. We punish them in that we make them accountable. But then we also say, but you're still a part of this community. So I think in that sense, just understanding that the world should be made up of collectivity. It should be about coming together as kin. And I guess that's why it's, I think the thing is that at times when you're exhausted, you call up someone else and say, I can't do this right now. And then that person will say, you know what, that's fine, I will step in. And, take some rest. And because at some point you have done that for the person you're calling. And at some point you will do that again. So we take shift, we support one another, we build one another, I guess, in a community. I think that's the answer and the solution. Yes, I'm actually...
I think that was just summed up so perfectly. I was going to echo what Leila said earlier, and what Farrukh also alluded to as well about, there's the well of people out there who want to get involved, who you're never on your own. I think that at the heart of white supremacy, capitalism, heteropatriarchy, ableism is alienation. Just like you say, is this, I'm sorry, that's actually your problem? No, it's not. It's all of our problem. It's always, there's an amazing saying that comes from an Aboriginal collective. If you've come here to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you've come here because your liberation is bound up with mine, then let's work together. That's from the Aboriginal activist group. I can't remember what year that was, but that, I think, is the sum of it. We are all invested. And I'll say this, actually, on the theme of anti-colonialism. Every white person should be an anti-colonial activist, because you've got shit spewing into your waters, sewage. You've got your rivers. Our rivers have been privatized. Our fields have been privatized. The royal family owns more land than anyone else in this planet. They own so much land. We should all be furious. Everybody. Our air is toxic. People are there's water, land, air, water, anything, you name it, is being poisoned and taken away from us by colonialism. It doesn't matter if you're British or Irish or African or Aboriginal. So we should all be very, very much committed to anti-colonial activism. It's not a black issue or an indigenous issue to me. I think it's an issue that we should all feel very connected to.
Oh, Tamsin, I'm unteachable and unemployable, so I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing.
Feel it has to always be something heroic, something big, and it doesn't. That wherever you are, there's always something you can do. Even if you're working in the BBC surrounded by a load of people who don't understand you, you will find somebody who thinks like you, and 2, 3, or 4 of you can just form a little group and a collective and begin to implement some change. So I think it's always, people think in these big moments, and we have to do big things, we don't. there's always something you can do if you've got a mindset that knows that this current system is corrupt and dangerous to us all. Then just think wherever you are. I work in the NHS, and there's something I can do. Just formed a collective of people and began to point out where the hierarchy in the NHS was racist. And we started off as 2 people. There's always something you can do if you've got the mindset that you want to make change.
Yeah, what Leila said.
We have time for one more question, Richard.
Thank you. I'd just like to commend the Tate for having these conversations. There are not many institutions in the world that would put on a tent embassy and facilitate a discussion like we've had over the last few days. And really to the Tate team, I'd like to say thank you.
Is it that time again?
Over to you to wrap us up.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, all the members here, and Brother Emory over there. Thank you all for coming. It's to listen to these amazing people and their stories. And the fact is that we now have, you have had your space in the Tate, in the Turbine Hall. You're like, again. Thank you all, and like I always say, you can go now.